My name is Claude Buettner, and it's my honor to host our 253rd CACOR Live presentation. The title today is Energy, Food, and Agriculture, Energy Gradients in Food Production. We are used to broad, seemingly homogeneous agricultural fields, but in reality, yields vary enormously as a consequence of environmental conditions and crop genomes. In addition, yields are very much a function of use of fertilizers and other industrially derived inputs. About 20% of all U.S. energy use is used to produce, process, transport, and prepare our food. How are these factors going to play out in the future? Our speaker, Charles A.S. Hall, received his Ph.D. in systems ecology under Howard Odum at UNC in 1970. He was professor at Cornell University, University of Montana, and SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. He is now very active as Professor Emeritus in Southern Oregon. He is author or editor of 14 books and 330 scholarly articles, and has been awarded the Hubbard Simmons Prize for Energy Education and the Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Society of Biophysical Economics. He is best known for his development of the concept of EROI, or Energy Return on Investment, and a new field, biophysical economics. Dr. Hall, you have the floor.
Okay, hi. I don't seem to have control of the slides. I can't forward the slides here, and I don't know why. Okay, hi. This is Charlie Hall. I'm 82 years old. I'm an ecologist, and I've spent much of my life actually in very different perspectives working on agriculture, and this is a summary of a lot of things I've learned about agriculture and about ecology by thinking about it. And so we start with the sense of food energy as humanity's critical resource, which must be gained efficiently. Many people in the world are very, very hungry or starving, often due to political upheaval, but also due to circumstances of the environment and of the large number of people in the world. So while I talk about all of this, let's not forget about hungry people and our need to try to feed them. So first of all, humans must eat. And this goes back, if you think of the 30,000 generations of humans before there were 500 or so generations of farming humans, most of our time as humans on this planet, or in this case, I suppose, proto-humans, we were hunters and gatherers. And here we are, we were successful at this. And early humans started harnessing energy, harvesting food energy, using other energy, first their own energy, and then fire. Fire is very important because it allows human to cook. And cooking is important because it enormously expands the foods we can eat, especially plants, which have cell walls, which is hard for us to digest unless they're cooked. So there's a whole book whose name the author I forgot about, the importance of fire for enormously increasing the amount of food that humans could have. We have to think of spears and knives and axes that were all used to provide our food as energy concentration devices that allowed humans, through their technology, to access much more food. And so people had an increasing ability to exploit food resources over time. And when there was an energy surplus, this resulted usually in not necessarily better fed humans, but more humans. and more environmental impacts. And we'll take a look at this in more detail. For most of our 2 million year existence as Homo sapiens or something like it, we were hunter-gatherers, and in this environment, EROI was very important. Matt Glaub, whose name I saw on our list of watchers, induced me to think about this. I had been impressed with the hunter-gatherers, who you might have seen, very charming people in The Gods Must Be Crazy, as some of the remaining hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari Desert of Africa. And it was thought that they had an EROI of around 10-1, making them a resource-rich society, and they would take their resource richness and put it into leisure. This had been studied in some detail by Richard Lee. But Matt, my last undergraduate special student, poked me into thinking about the what must be the EROI of hunting. Richard Lee did not think that the hunting was a very proficient source of food, but in fact, we were able to, Matt mostly, able to do some good studies of how much energy you would get back from your investment in hunting kudu or antelope or other African species. And the particular way that humans do this is persistent hunting. We can never catch a fat running antelope if we just run after them. But if we run after them in the middle of the day and keep after them, the antelope will overheat until it can run no more. So if you have a skilled tracker, usually an older fellow, and a fast young fellow to keep the antelope moving, and you keep after him for 4 or 5 different times, the antelope will eventually be found under a bush, panting and unable to move, and the human can spear him, and maybe that's the reason that we're here. But anyway, with various assumptions about the animals, we found the energy return on investment to be very high, from 26 to 66 calories return for one expended. I mean, look at an antelope, that's a lot of calories. So this is looking at how we got food in the past, rather efficiently, apparently. Humans moved out of Africa. It's important to realize that humans in South Africa and in West Africa are as different from our original humans in East Africa, probably, as we are, Europeans, at least I am, and others in the world. So as humans moved out of Africa, they moved into very different environments, but they kept hunting and gathering. Here's a depiction of a Neanderthal family, and I suppose I'm supposed to have 4% Neanderthal genes, and Homo sapiens in general. Quite charming rendition in a museum in Croatia. Now, some 10,000 years ago, remember, this is a tiny part of humanity's time on the planet. We began a new approach to food, agriculture. First, apparently shifting cultivation, which still feeds maybe 5 or 10% of humanity. There are people in India that take buses out to their shifting cultivation feeds. And the big problem with agriculture is maintaining fertility. So here's what you do in shifting cultivation. You cut down the original vegetation that's there. These pictures are from Mexico and Costa Rica both, and you let it dry. And the longer you let the forest grow, or the older the forest, when you cut it, the more nutrients are in the vegetation. The important thing is take the nutrients that are in the vegetation, to burn it and leave it as ash on the soil, and then you come along with a dibble stick, just a pointed stick and a bag of seeds, and you put the seeds in the ground at the right time of the year, and there's a great deal of skill associated with this, and you can get a pretty good yield, up to half a ton or a ton per hectare from crops using, here is the typical American, meaning all of the Americas, triage or group of squash, beans growing up, the corn stalks, and maize or corn as the main crop. All of these grown together, and the beans fertilize the maize, and the pears, the squash have prickly leaves that discourage many of the herbivores. And you can see this, this picture was from Venezuela, but you can see a recent crop, recent burn right here, maybe 1 or 2 year old field here, maybe a 3-year-old field here, a bit older here, and a bit older here. So they rotate. That's why it's called shifting. You shift from one area to another, because if you keep growing in the same field, the yields will be very, very low because the nutrients have been lost. Now, it still exists, for example, in Costa Rica, but not in any good spot. This is not a good spot for agriculture, I can tell you, but it's where shifting cultivators were undertaking their craft. These are poorer, more marginal, whatever that means, people in Costa Rica that don't have access to good land, and yet they are still trying to get their food because food is essential. Okay, then along came settled agriculture, starting in the Tigris and Euphrates area of present-day Iraq, and also in the Americas and in Asia. We tend to focus on this area of the Tigris and Euphrates, and I want you to note there. That's where we get. That was an ancient city from early agriculture, where we get the word urban. And so we had early cities here. The agricultural surplus allowed more people, even up to and including cities. And that's why we have cities. Now, technology evolved and yields increased. Maybe the most important thing that has happened is the genetic engineering by 5,000 or 10,000 years of our ancestors to go from the wild precursor of maize, teosinte, however you pronounce it, which is this wild plant here, which is essentially, we would call it a weed, into the maize of today, which I love. And the other great technology was mostly Asian, was the management of nutrients by the management of water through various cropping systems, and very, very intensive management of the species over time and of the water. Now, the first people this lecture is going to talk about energy and agriculture, especially modern industrial energy. And the two great thinkers who thought about this was my Ph.D. advisor, Howard Odum, and David Pimentel of Cornell University, Howard Odum of the University of North Carolina and University of Florida. And they were the first one to understand how important industrial energy was for the food that we ate. And Odum made a series of diagrams about how there was, here's the source of the energy coming into the crops, and that in modern agriculture, there was a huge amount of energy flowing from what he calls city resources, and I would call industrial resources, into various processes of fertilization, of cultivation, of weed control, and so forth, of irrigation, that resulted in the food that eventually flowed into the cities. And this was powered by fossil fuel. And just to give you an example, here's a range cow, a lean fellow with no inputs from the industrial process, yielding 1 unit of energy from 100 units of sun. And then if you add in 50 additional units of fossil fuel, you get 40 yields from what he called back in 1973 a beef machine. This was in his book, Environment, Power, and Society. And so this was the first time we began increasing thinking about the importance of industrial energy in feeding ourselves. And this is the hectares required to feed a person, which went from 2,000 or 25,000, maybe not needed, but used, to 100 by subsistence agriculture to 2.5. In other words, we used much less acreage or hectareage per person by intensifying agriculture. And this is missed by many environmentalists, that the industrialization of agriculture has allowed us to use only, who knows, 10 or 25% as much land area in agriculture as otherwise we would need to feed the 8 billion people on the planet. And well, that's just the way it is. Now, I've studied the energy return on energy investment of agriculture and many other things and the use of fossil fuels. So I'm going to tell you how this has occurred. All of this is over time, how we have got to the situation where we are now. A really nice graph provided by Kerry King is that from 1300 to 1750 or so, that about half of all GDP expenditures were allocating to getting energy, wood, fodder, or food. Those were the energy sources for civilization, in this case of England, from 1300 to 1750. In other words, it was an EROI of no more than 2 back for 1 input. Half of all economic activity and half of all energy expenditure was to get energy as wood or fodder or food. And people were mostly very, very poor. They never traveled more than 20 miles from where they were born. Most people, of course, some kings and nobles were rich, but it required many thousands of people's agriculture to support that. Now, when coal came along, that began to drop to perhaps 20%, 20 to 40% of all economic activity was to get the energy to run all of society, and with oil down to 5 or 10%. So the introduction of fossil fuel enormously increased the energy return on investment of society and allowed the enormous wealth that has been generated in the meantime. So remember, most of history, EROI has been no better than, or not much better than 2 to 1, and sometimes less than that. So this is the increase of energy from traditional biomass from 1800, i.e. around the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, to today. This is 2023. Solar and wind are really very small, and one could argue not more than, maybe it is, traditional biomass, and hydropower is another important traditional solar energy. So the modern, what we think of modern renewable energies, wind turbines and photovoltaics are not yet very much of the energy supply to civilization. We continue to be, I think the latest number was 82% from fossil fuel, meaning coal, oil, natural gas, and fossil meaning old. Now, the total economic activity is highly correlated with our consumption of oil and fossil fuels more generally. You can do it both ways, and the results are about the same. As is the GDP, which has increased just a little bit more than the slope of the increase of fossil fuel. This for the world and this for the world. You see different countries, their wealth is more or less proportional to the energy that they use. In fact, basically what economics is the use of energy, and these guys should be subsidized with an oil well, I think, to, well, this guy's got a Volkswagen symbol on him. But anyway, they're in grinding up nature to make wealth. That's capitalism. Of course, it will destroy Earth, and to think differently is just plain stupid. Well, yes, but it's not just capitalism. It's most modern economies, whatever you want to call them, whatever the political system, are all about using more energy to exploit more energy to generate more wealth, what we call wealth. Maximum power, is this driven by maximum power? I had one of my readers ask me about this, and I'm not going to talk about maximum power here, but it's the idea that there's natural selection for more and more energy to be then diverted back into infrastructure to extract more energy from nature and to enhance the whole human, or could be biological enterprise. Biology is limited by the input of sunlight. We use old sunlight in the form of fossil fuel to greatly enhance our use of energy. Every politician or dictator runs on the promise of more, and you cannot have more without using more energy, or at least I don't know how to do that. And I've thought about it my whole life. So what's happened with the industrialization of agriculture? The labor productivity, the farm production per hour of labor has gone way up, as has the total farm output and the production per hectare. All of these are enhanced by the use of fossil fuels. Here's another graph of the same thing. The man hours required to produce 100 bushels used to be 350, and it's gone down to just 10 or so. And the yield per hectare or acre has gone up, and that's it's amazing. It's the virtue of modern agriculture. And Howard Odum drew this graph of dollar subsidy, which is the same as more energy. A dollar today is about 5 megajoules worth of, it represents 5 megajoules worth of energy. And this is modern agriculture has greatly enhanced the productivity per hectare. And just to give you a visual of what this is a 33 horsepower harvester that's driven by 5 people, and plus you have to have more work elsewhere to get the feed for the fuels for the mules, the food for the mules, so forth. But just compare this, keep this in your mind with this. This is a 200 horsepower harvester, and that's a small one today, driven by 1 person, air conditioned, listening to his favorite music, and doing an enormous amount of work. In this case, doing, what is that, 7 times more work than this machine here, with just 1 person. And of course, somebody working in the oil field. Now, we've looked at in various publications this was Steve Below and others, is looking at the edible energy return on if input. And for the United States agriculture as a whole, we get 2 calories or 2 joules per joule input. So about 2 to 1. And if you look at this over time, Cleveland had done a study earlier that we compared ours with, and we got about the same numbers for overlapping years, but it decreased enormously in the past. Now, what we're not doing here, this is just output per fossil fuel input. So the input here might have been horses or other, so maybe the efficiency gain is not quite as much as indicated here. Here's another study done by Steinhardt and Steinhardt. And again, on this year, we're sort of in the same ballpark. And then it's gotten a little bit more efficient. And we were really curious about why did it get more efficient? Is technology improving not only the efficiency per hectare and the efficiency per worker, but also the efficiency per unit fuel? That didn't seem to be making sense to us. I'll answer that in just a moment. But meanwhile, this is the same study for Canada. And Canada does just about the same as we did, about 2 to 1 for all food in Canada. But we found out that this number here, this increase was a bit misleading, because what it was is that we're growing more and more maize. And maize is a particularly productive crop, most of which we feed to animals or feed to our cars. In the United States, we are required by law to put 10%, to have 10% of our gasoline at the pump to be ethanol. And so when you take that factor out of consideration, we're about flat, as is, and maybe not quite as, just about the same as Canada. I don't want to put us into, we'd better compete in hockey and not in food efficiency. Now, but it depends enormously on what kind of food. And this is a summary that was undertaken by Steve Below and myself and some others, and all of these, all of everything I'm talking about here today is published, and I'm providing the references for them, and I've done them in various parts of my life. So for grains, you get a lot of energy, and grains are principally corn and maize and rice, which is about, I can't remember the number exactly, but it's more than half of all the food that people in the world eat. And the reason is they're so productive. And maybe that has to do with being C4 crops, and I'll leave that to other people. But almost all other foods, vegetables might be 1.8 to 1. Fruits are, you get back a half a calorie for 1 calorie of oil invested in growing them. Dairy, a tenth, 1 for 10. In chicken, mostly about most proteins are about 0.1 calorie returned for 1 invested, or an EROI of 0.1 to 1. But it's high quality, it's good food that we get back. And so, but this is in the field. By the time you eat the food on your plate, it takes about 10 calories per food calorie by the time we eat it, and about a third to grow it, about a third to process and transport it, and about a third to prepare it in your kitchen. Maybe a large third for producing the food. So that's about 20%, somewhere between 17 and 20% of our total energy use in the United States is for our food. And obviously, the higher on the hog, so to speak, that you eat, the more energy that it takes to grow the food. Now, going back, all of this sounds positive, that we're producing more food through agriculture, although maybe at a lower efficiency. But there's always been problems, and the problem is fundamentally this. A natural ecosystem hangs on to nutrients in the biomass that's generated, and below ground biomass and everything associated with that, all the mycorrhizae and so forth. Very little loss below the root zone, because the roots take nutrients that fall down with leaves and then get decomposed into the soil and so forth. And the whole system takes up the nutrients, hangs on to it, and you develop a nutrient inventory. That's why shifting cultivation works, because the trees retain and regrow the nutrient inventory of the system. Whereas agriculture, you remove a lot of the nutrients with the harvest, and then you expose the soil to erosion. And so always there's a problem with erosion. And this was a big problem even in ancient times. And here's a map of the old world. The city of Ephesus, you see, was a port city in the 7th century BC. But so much soil came down the Cayster River, this is a big agricultural area, that by 2nd century AD, it was very much inland. And this was occurring everywhere there was agriculture. Now, another problem was people were always fighting with. We think of the human population as growing, but oftentimes this is Egypt that had good records. We had plague and Arab conquest, and plague again and Black Death and Turkish conquest. And oh my gosh, so the population, you see, hasn't necessarily increased over time. In China, it has, but with large famines and large rebellions and periodic introduction of new technologies, and even Irish potatoes and fossil fuel fertilizer and discipline, and now China is even more. And then, of course, we all know about what happened in Ireland. So humans haven't necessarily grown in the past, but the net effect, of course, is that they've grown up to 8 billion people. Here is today, after we uncovered the sand that was covering over the ziggurat here. You know, how the mighty have fallen, but generally it happened again and again. You get tremendous growth of people, tremendous civilizations, overuse the soil, and then it would collapse, as Joseph Tainter has written about. And so all areas were devoid of soil fertility over time, and England was especially aware of that. So they went back to the Battle of Waterloo and dug up all the bones of the horses and the men that had fallen there, and ground them up and used them for fertilizer. That's how desperate they were. And they were doing this in 1860 or so. Then they discovered guano. Alexander von Humboldt brought guano to Europe. And this horrible, smelly stuff turned out to be enormously good for generating crop growth, and gunpowder, by the way. And so these islands, seabird islands, were exploited for guano, and still are. And then Fritz Haber, and all the reason that we've been so well fed our life is due to Fritz Haber, who has a more complex path, perhaps, But he in 1908 figured out how to take an enormous amount of energy and take a tube and fill it with fertilizer. I mean, fill it with natural gas and with air, which is 70% nitrogen, and with the right catalyst, he compressed the gas, the tube, while heating it, and ran around his campus yelling, "Eureka, Eureka," with his clothes on, I think, not like Archimedes. He had, for the first time, generated nitrogen that plants could use. And nitrogen was the critical fertility element that plants were lacking. And the result was an enormous increase in our ability to produce food. So this is how much nitrogen fertilizer we're using around the world. Canada is 250 kilograms per hectare. Now, to give you an idea, here's the tip of a 600 kilogram bag. So half of that bag per hectare being used in Canada, little less in the United States, apparently. But all around the world, you find people are using nitrogen fertilizer. And this is maintaining us. This is maintaining the 8 billion of us in the world. Without that, we're dead, or half of us at least. Now, I want to speak about how I learned a lot as an ecologist about how plants grow. We think of an agricultural field or agriculture in general driving through the Midwest of the United States or Canada. It seems like it's all the same, but it isn't at all. And this is all comes down to what's called best first principle, that humans use high quality, low cost resources before low quality, high cost resources, obviously. A best to worst ordering of resource exploitation. And this is based on ideas of the economist David Ricardo. And so the original idea came from Robert Whitaker, who I used to teach with, where he looked at the distribution of different species in the Smoky Mountains. And he would find that they varied as over space, but as a function of gradients of temperature, from high temperature at the bottom of the mountains to low temperature at the top, and as a basis of soil moisture, which are the two most important gradients for plants. And ridge tops would be very dry, and draws and stream beds would be very wet for plants. So he found that the plants were very much distributed on that. And unfortunately, after he died, I got really interested in this idea and wrote a paper about it, which I think is maybe my best paper, but not many other people think that. And we go from geographical space. This is just a view of a mountain range versus gradient space. And this might be gradient 1 might be temperature, and gradient 2 might be soil moisture. And every species has its own isoplus of where it does best. And it can only, it grows best, you see, at the perfect conditions for that species, and grows well enough to reproduce here, further away in temperature, colder or warmer than its optimal, or wetter or drier. And then it may exist further out, but it cannot reproduce. It doesn't make enough energy to reproduce, or in the case of food plants, to make seeds. And so I took this idea and applied it. Well, here, let me explain a little more. People think a lot about the energy gain over space, but there's also energy cost. So as it gets warmer and warmer for a salmon, for example, I thought a lot about this with respect to salmon. You see that the respiration goes higher and higher till the organism dies. And the net, or the growth, is the difference between these two. And we find this again and again. I have all kinds of examples of where trout swim in a stream and salmon go in the ocean and so forth and so on. It's really interesting to me. And organisms have been selected so that if they can, they will try to exploit the situation. They try to live in the situation where they get the largest energy gain. Here's another way of looking at the reproductive range, and this is their geographical range. They can be found as strays all over the place, but you can only do well here. And what this means for agriculture, well, we'll show you. We looked at the use of gradient space in some detail. I did in my life in three very different perspectives. First of all, global maize production per hectare. This is where crops grow in the world. Crops grow in only 10 or 20% of the world. You simply can't grow crops in most of the world, or not many of them. You cannot have real agriculture. The Midwest of the US and the lower prairie provinces of Canada, having a senior moment here in Argentina, well, whatever they are in parts of Ukraine, of course, is a good place, and India and parts of Asia where crops can grow very well. But most of the world, it's too warm or too cold, or just too dry or too wet or too something. And if you look at this, this is an amazing thing. This is study by Chang in 1981 of the average yields of maize, all the same genetic material, more or less, from 55 north to 45 south, with the equator here in the middle. And I was curious about why you never got more than about 1 ton per hectare of maize in the tropics when we were getting 8 or 10 in Iowa. And then I found this graph, and I talked to Margaret Smith and others, and there's New Zealand up there too. It works in the southern hemisphere as well. And always in the tropics, you always have about 12 hours of night. The day and night are approximately equal in the tropics. But in the growing season in the US or Canada, you have twice the daylight that you have the nighttime. Now you got to remember, at night, plants use energy for their own maintenance metabolism. And so at night, which is very long in the tropics, the plants, the maize is using the energy they produce during the day. And they only have about an equal day in nighttime, 12 hours each in the tropics. So they never can get the net yield you can, where in the tropics you have much more assimilation. You'd have a higher during the growing season than the respiration energy cost at night, and you get much higher yields. So that's the first use of gradients. The second use of gradients we did with David Murphy, who's done some marvelous work on this, and myself, and Bobby Powers, we worked on this, where we looked at the net per yield of the energy return on investment for corn for use in ethanol. And all the dots are where the ethanol refineries are and distillation plants. But you see, it's only in Nebraska and Iowa and going up into a little southern Minnesota that you can make a profit, a net energy profit, i.e. an EROI of greater than 1-for-1 on maize. There's plenty of maize grown in Texas or Pennsylvania, but the yield in general is lower than the darker colored. That's the only areas where you can make a sufficient profit so that your maize is an energy source to put in a net energy source to put in your automobiles. And then, so the maize used for ethanol has meant that we now grow our pigs and our cornflakes in areas with much lower EROI, but that's another story. And finally, looking at this in Costa Rica, I wrote 2 books on Costa Rica and the tropics in general and agriculture in the tropics. And here you find the land very intensely used, and we undertook very complex analyses of each crop in Costa Rica. I won't go into the details, but the first thing I found, to my amazement, was how incredibly industrialized agriculture was in Costa Rica. And everywhere you went, there were petrochemical dispensers for the farmers. Now, Costa Rica is a very mountainous country. It has extremely different environmental conditions in different parts of this. You might say the gradients are very large. And I was thinking about gradients and for example, this is coffee, a really important crop. Now, somebody says, well, coffee will grow anywhere in Costa Rica. It will, but it will grow with a yield of better than 1 ton per hectare, or even only 1 ton per hectare, only in the darker shaded areas. Now, if you plot them versus gradients of temperature and precipitation, the dotted line is all the possibilities in Costa Rica. You can make a coffee profit only where the gradient conditions are optimum. And you see coffee, it's a mean temperature of about 22, 23 degrees and about 2 meters or 3 meters per year of rain. And for pineapple, you see the gradient. It's just, the pineapples grow up here, grow best in these conditions. Coffee grows best here, and bananas over here. So every crop has its own optimal conditions. That's why there's only some places in the world that crops will grow. I will neglect this. What is our agricultural future? Well, it's mostly our oil future. And I recommend to study it. You can find it online by Elizabeth Colbert or Colbert, I don't know. One of my favorite writers who's in the New Yorker. And she, one of the subtitle of her paper on Do We Need Another Green Revolution, in which she said, a few months ago, more than 100 Nobel laureates released an open letter predicting we are not on track to meet future food needs, not even close. And here's our friend Thomas Malthus. People poo-poo Malthus. Malthus will dominate our future. And I will focus on the energy needed, and in that I focus on M. King Hubbard, who was the first to suggest that there was a limit to the oil and gas that we can get out of the world. And here's Norman Borlaug, who is responsible for the most important technology, the Green Revolution, which basically is based on one gene. There can be no permanent progress in the battle against hunger until the agencies that fight for increased food production and those that fight for population control unite in a common effort. Well, I feel that very strongly. We're all worried about CO2 and the news is all on climate change and stuff. But I think depletion is more important. I made this graph in 1970, published it in 1975. This would be a Hubbard curve for the world for oil, for gas, and coal. I think I'm about right for oil, about right for gas. And I overestimated coal. Well, we'll see. Now, I want to talk a little bit about geology, and meanwhile, just incidentally, I want to recommend this book. It's just a great, fun read. Dinosaurs at the Dinner Table. Here's petroleum geology in 3 minutes. You have extreme global warming and a rift where the Earth is going apart, like in East Africa now. So that you don't get mixing to the bottom, you get anaerobic conditions on the bottom. The organic material for millions of years accumulates. Then you have to have rains and fill up the sediment and generate the pressure cook it for 100 million years. And you generate oil, gas, and water, which are migrate from source rocks to trap rocks. And this is, I don't know where it is. There were little water wells are just up here. So this is 2 miles down, more or less, where the conditions are, the temperatures are right to make oil and gas. You need gradients, proper gradients for formation of oil also. And here's where all the oil wells have been drilled in the United States and Canada. I'd like to get the original of this if anybody knows where it came from, but we pretty much got the traditional oil out that we can. And when we drill more in 1980s, price went up, we drilled more, but it didn't influence very much the production of oil. This was our peak oil in 1970. This is peak conventional oil. And the energy return on investment, which I've talked about here before, was declining from, as far as we could tell, all global oil wells. US, just to put it into context, here's how much oil the US has. Not much of the world's oil, although we're the largest producer now, we're just taking it out faster. And here's Canada, you're in a better situation, but that's really crummy oil, you know all about that. And I'm gonna not talk about these things. I want to talk about last thing, fracking. George Mitchell, is he modern America's savior? His daughter was sucking a milkshake with a straw, and he got the idea of horizontal drilling. You go down 2 miles, you release explosives in a 2-mile lateral. You turn the drill sideways. You put in sand and water and chemicals and tremendous pressure. And the United States would be SOL without fracked oil, the red oil here. Here we are somewhere around here. Our conventional oil, as Hubbard predicted, has gone down. When will the shale oil now produces more than 80% of the United States oil, including the natural gas liquids that we make gasoline out of. Here's the source rocks migrating up to the trap rocks. This is what we've exploited in the past. The source rocks is what we are now getting with Mitchell's technique. And this is what it looks like. Good Lord, we're busting up these rocks and getting this little bit of oil, but we get a lot of oil from doing this. How? We put in enormous energy investments into a well. We hook up 8 or 10 fire truck engines on top of each other to get the pressure to crack the rocks. And one of the benefits of this is the energy return on investment, at least initially. This is for the Bakken wells, analyzed by Adam Brandt and his crew. And the EROI went from around 10. The conventional wells now are less than 10 to 1, we think, in US, and went up to 30, 35 to 1. And now we're declining as we are overexploiting the various shale basins. The Permian is the most important one remaining, and gas over here in the Marcellus. And this is what it looks like over much of our country now. And under each of these wells are half a mile apart. and it looks with 2 mile laterals under every well. The hole underneath of much of our country is fracked oil wells. And well, anyway, here's more low, medium, and high estimates of all fossil fuels. Look, sooner or later, we've got to run up against that. And that's what's going to end agriculture, I think. And it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it, from Upton Sinclair. That's our future of oil and gas and natural gas liquids for the future, published in 2022. And conventional oil, I think, is on its downward trend. Fracked oil is peaking about now, we guess. And we got a little more heavy oil in Canada and Venezuela, and a lot of natural gas liquids. I think the future of agriculture is going to be for the next 10, 20, the next generation maybe, based on natural gas. And then we'll see. But, you know, ultimately it's this spike. And who knows what the future is going to be. My solution maybe is deep geothermal. That's another lecture, if there is a solution. And I leave you with that thought from my favorite cartoonist. And all this is developed in great detail in our book on energy and the wealth of nations. My final professional goal, which I've talked about earlier in CACOR, is to unhorse neoclassical economics, which I think is misleading everybody in the world, and that's the end. That was about 55 minutes. Let's see, I am.
Thank you so much, Charlie. That was great. Art, I think you might want to make an adjustment. I do not see my face, but that I don't have to have my face shown, but I think the questioners should have their faces shown. We might be in a different mode. And as host, I have the prerogative of asking the first question, but I'm going to say that Peter McKinnon, you are on deck, but the first question goes to William Reese, to whom I'm going to give my slot. And William, if you're still there, and I know you had a comment that was partly, or a question that was partly answered, but I welcome any comments you have at this time.
Well, Charlie, wonderful talk. We've gone back and forth for a couple of decades now, I guess, about these things. But I really want you to tell us what you really think is going to happen to so-called civilization when economically recoverable oil and gas, and therefore fertilizers and all the other inputs that have contributed to agricultural productivity, are simply no longer available. Tell us what you really think, Charlie.
Conflict. I think the imponderables are social factors, the behavior of humans. And I have no way to predict that, except recent events don't give me much hope. And you know, the conflicts in Europe and Middle East and so forth, and the behavior of American voters do not give me any particular, and Canadian voters do not give me any particular enthusiasm. I don't know. I think Nafisa Ahmed has a wonderful little book about the biophysical triggers of social conflict. And I think he's got it as close as anybody in that book. And also, you know, you go back to Joe Tainter, and the collapse of complex societies. Now, I don't know. I mean, the problem, Bill, with this is I don't know for sure that this is the case because I've been sort of a gloom and doomer a bit, at least when I look at the analyses, since 1970. But here we are, the world is more or less as wealthy and well-fed as ever on the average. So we keep saying not yet. And Jean Lerner, he keeps predicting the end of oil, but then we get a little more technology that moves us along. But I don't know what the next unit of technology is. And of course, if we're going to make the oil age last longer, then there are the climatic and other consequences of that. So I don't know. I don't know, but I'm getting out of here. Some if there are any young people here, then if you can send me a postcard if you can figure out where to send it. Tell me what's going on. I think it's technically resolvable, and I'm very enthusiastic. And like Borlaug says, if you got to do the population control in the same time as the technology, and I think we could get a sustainable small footprint energy by taking the fracking technology and applying it to deep geothermal. And there's some good ideas for using that, using pentane as a working fluid and you'd have a small and generating ultra high pressure steam at the top of the plant surface. But yeah, if we took the effort that we put into nuclear and we put it into deep geothermal, my guess is that we could generate enough energy without letting the nuclear genie even further out of the bottle. And I'm worried about dirty bombs much more than I'm worried about explosive ones. I think that might be a way to go forward if we also dealt with constraints. And we have the issue of maximum power. Let's take the next question.
Okay, thank you so much, Bill.
And if you think I'm pessimistic, but listen to Bill. I watched you, Bill, for an hour, 2 hours before this, trying to get my get your insights and a little bit into my talk. So
Can I have a quick
think you're more
follow-up?
pessimistic than I am, but I'm not. That takes something.
Please, Bill, go ahead.
Okay, Charlie, I get you, and I know you try to be optimistic, but let me ask this. I mean, it's overpopulation and energy that, as your graphs have shown, have enabled us to scour the planet. We're destroying the biophysical basis of civilization's existence, not to mention displacing thousands of other species. So if we do discover, whether through geothermal or nuclear or whatever, another source of abundant cheap energy, won't we simply use it to continue the destruction of the ecosphere? And that's game over no matter which way we go. I mean, every other civilization in the kinds of symptoms that we're going through now in the US and in the West and elsewhere collapses. We're on the way down. I think.
Bill, there are Romans in Rome, lots of them. I've seen them. And there are Mayans in southern Mexico. I've seen them. I think humans are likely to survive.
We'll
whether
survive.
Industrial or what we think of human culture. Now, don't get me wrong. I think we can do it, but we can't do it under the current political. Every politician runs on more.
Okay, I agree. I think you're absolutely right. Hugo Barghi is on the list here, and he would tell us that the ascent is long and slow, but the descent can be very rapid and precise.
Could be.
So let's see what happens. Thank you
Okay,
very much, Charlie.
thank you both. And John Meyer, you are on deck. You can turn on your mic and your video, and Peter has the floor.
Thanks, Claude. Charles, thank you very much for a very stimulating, as usual, discussion. I actually didn't add a question. I did have a comment, and it was at the beginning of your talk or early into it. I just wanted to point out an excellent book that I've read in the past and to consult from time to time is called Near 1,000 Tables. And it was written by a Mexican academic while he was a professor at Oxford. And it is his name was Felipe Fernandez Emeritus, and it's an excellent book on how we learned to cook food. In other words, your point about plants, maybe think about it when the cellular structure of plants, and you said, wasn't it couldn't break down with that till we get cooking. So maybe think of this Near the 1,000 Tables book. So I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in following that line. And I see others have commented as well, provided another reference on the same subject area. So thanks again, Charles. Excellent presentation. And I'm on the same page, and I think as you and Bill in that last round. I mean, I'm trying to be an optimist as well, but we're certainly pushing the limits of our ability to hold our society together. So thank you. Over to you, Claude.
Okay, any comments on that, Charlie, or on to the next question?
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, so Art Hunter, you are on deck, and John Meyer, you have the floor.
Hey, Charlie, I love your talks because it gets my juices stimulated here. And when I heard you were talking about the EROI of agriculture, I ran back to one study that I was very keen on, done in 2008 by Uwe Schneider and Pete Smith on energy intensities in greenhouse gas emission mitigation in global agriculture. And what they did was they produced the couple of time points for different crops, the amount of energy in versus the amount of energy out. And you've got a couple of time series there. But what I found when I went through the FAO data, the energy intensity was going, the EROI was actually going down for less developed countries because they were rapidly adopting mechanized techniques. So they had much more input, and it was gradually going up for highly developed countries as they became more efficient. Now, the data sort of cuts out about 20 years ago, and I tried to get Schneider and Smith interested in doing a timeline every year, because from about the beginning of this century to now, we should be able to see some impacts of climate change. So, question is, can you suggest anyone who would be willing to do a study on say an annual EROI for several different crops, maybe key crops, wheat, rice, whatever, that we could track and see if, we pick up anything. Like if the EROI of in developed countries starts to drop, then we can, I think, put that down to soil and climate. And I think that's a very important. So the question is, can you think of anyone who might take that on?
The answer is yes, but the problem is funding. And I've been trying to get governments to do proper EROI, and incidentally, I have arguments about the technicalities of that, but that's not an important issue compared to government united. Well, we can't talk about that now in my country, but maybe Canada. Governments should be in the business of doing it. Canada at least does IO analysis still, I think, energy IO analysis. But the problem is the funding. So, I'm looking for $10,000 right now to support somebody who is undertaking some of these analyses for Mexico, and so forth. So I've got the people. I need the
Okay.
money, and chunks
come
of
back to you.
$10,000 can do a lot of good.
Okay, I'm not sure we've got a
You're not the one
$10,000
to ask
chunk,
for
but
money. I understand that.
okay. All right, good. I'll come back to you on that. Thanks very much. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, good. I do. John
Okay.
has several interesting books on all this stuff. I don't know, maybe he should be a speaker again sometime. I don't know. Okay,
Next,
next.
Dave, Doherty, you're on deck, and Art Hunter, you have the floor.
Yeah, Charlie, I guess I'm a little more driven by what you made a swing at, but skipped over substantially, and that is with climate change itself. One can understand how, as the planet warms and deserts grow around the equator and agriculture starts moving further north. But there's also the physical problems that come with climate change, like drought, floods, wind, horrible winds and wildfires, and this sort of devastation. Has anyone looked at this in terms of agricultural productivity?
Yes. First of all, I think that the question you ask is a good one and can be looked at. I think that the various crops have to maintain their location in gradient space, but that location in gradient space moves with climate change. And I think this would be, if there are any agronomists out there, I think this is a really good concept that can be used to assess our future potential for agriculture. And but we really have to understand the response of crops. I tried to understand the response of crops to climate alone by examining thousands of outputs of agricultural research stations. But unfortunately, they never had plots with no fertilizers. They were always looking at the maximum that they could get for their location. And I was interested in what you could get from that environmental conditions for the crop. And they didn't run controls with no fertilizers or no amendments or whatever. And so I think that attitude has permeated too much agricultural thinking so that we don't understand enough the response of individual crops to climate change. So to answer your question, I think we could do it. I think we should do it. I think our agricultural research stations could benefit a lot by looking at gradient space versus geographic space. And I think there's one or two studies that come close, but I can't tell you what they are. I don't know if I've answered your question well enough, but that's a shot at it.
No, you did it well. Thank you.
Okay, Jan Mulder, you are on deck, which means you can turn on your mic and your video now as Dave takes the floor.
Thanks, Claude.
Mhm.
So I had simply looked up a few of the references to which you pointed us, Charlie, and I've put them in the chat. The chat will become part of the record here. I suppose I can just make one comment before I pass to the next, which is when I was working on climate change studies, the economics thereof in particular, but also human health, for Health Canada about a decade and a half ago, we did a study where, among other things, we looked at the possibility of continuing with fisheries and agriculture and a bunch of other things that are very important to feeding the population of Canada. I found out about, I think maybe even in the same week that we published our internal study, there was an American study that involved hundreds of scientists. Same basic thing. The conclusions of both were we're in some pretty bad trouble, kind of along the lines of what Bill Reese was saying earlier. I did note probably within the last month, all of the scientists who'd been working on those because they were periodic in the United States since that time were fired.
Or what?
Fired.
Oh, yeah, sure.
From there was a big working group that was doing, I think, annual studies, and they've all been let go. So don't expect to see a whole lot more coming out of the American government. You may continue to see it coming out of other countries, but it probably isn't going to be US specific.
I have I wish I'd included this in my talk. I have a picture of me at a local demonstration with a play card that says, "Make America Great Again." And then I have 1, destroy our universities. 2, destroy science. 3, destroy our alliances. 4, destroy our trust. And I have, 8 things going down my Make America Great Again. I've never seen a recipe for destroying a country like we're getting from Trump. And it's astonishing. And the problem is not necessarily Trump, it's that we have, almost half the country that votes for him and don't have a clue. And we have probably had pretty close to the best economy ever under Biden, and people are just bitching and moaning, and Americans are complaining about 5% inflation rate. Well, try Argentina. They have no clue how well off we are, and they bitch and moan, and they worry about the loss of industrial jobs, the loss of factory jobs. You ask Americans if they want to work in a factory, and 90% say hell no. They don't want to go back there.
And they certainly,
you have a whole political system that's going on myths. It's crazy.
They're certainly not going to work in the fields either.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot harder.
And those are the people who are harvesting our food. And he's throwing out horrible things that they're doing.
Before long, I think other countries are going to look at the Trump threats and say, we've had enough of this. We're just not going to deal with you anymore. And we're not going to send you food. That's it.
On that cheery note, Robert Kaufman is with a PhD student, so he's still listening, but he may not be able to ask his question. Otherwise, I would invite him to turn on his mic and his video. And now Jan has the floor.
You can call me Jan. It might be easier.
Jan, okay. It's a very interesting question and comment you have.
The comment I had was about the biofuels, the mice used for biofuels. There was said that it had a very high EROI, but the machines the farmers have to use to make these biofuels, they keep running day and night. So is that calculated in the EROI of these biofuels? Many farmers have a lot of solar panels on their rooftops. They have to be built by coal. We all know they come from China. I think it all has to be calculated.
Well, the only biofuels I have personally good numbers on are maize, and that's around 1 for 1, a little higher in the best regions and definitely lower in most places you grow maize. And 1 for 1 isn't enough to run the society. You need probably 10 to 1 to have EROI to have anything like a modern society. Now I've heard that biodiesel can be made at 3 to 1, but I don't have the study. And the the analyses that we do, and I've sent the reference in, I don't know if they're posting it, but I can send it to you. If you know, CHALL@ESF.edu. See, that's my email, and I'll send
Okay.
you our papers. And
Yes,
yes, you
please.
include all the things you're talking about.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so I don't know. And we've even done sensitivity analysis. And I got David Pimentel and I can't think of his name right now, from University of Michigan, who were at loggerheads over ERI. We even wrote a paper together asking why they had such different results. And I can send that to you as well. Okay, and if
Yes,
you send
please.
it, the question to Art, he can send it to me. Anyway, I'll supply you with several papers on that.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah. Thank you.
Robert,
And what I think we should be doing this every day. It's ridiculous that we don't understand. We're just afloat in a Peter Pan world
Well,
of dreams.
the same counts for hydrogen, right?
Hydrogen is not a fuel; it's a carrier.
No, I know.
And I don't think it's a very good one.
No.
The molecule is so small, it leaks and it doesn't compress very well to move it anywhere.
In the
And
Netherlands,
there's
they
all
don't
kinds of
understand
problems
that.
with it, but it does have one use, I think, is when a wind turbine is spinning with no load, you might as well make hydrogen, I guess.
Hmm.
But I don't know. You know,
Okay.
I've got friends who don't like it very much. Let's say that.
Uh, I
Okay,
tried LinkedIn. Yeah.
we're down to about 7 minutes for the recorded portion of this presentation, and Ugo Bardi has the floor, and Barry Bruce, you can turn on your mic and your video now.
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Claude, but really I don't have questions for Charlie, because you know Charlie is my master, is my mentor, he is my figure of reference, the man I have been following for most of my active life as a scientist. Charlie, you told me about EROI. It's fantastic. Do you realize the effect you had on this somewhat younger colleague of yours? And you may also remember that once in Spain we changed ties. You should still have my tie somewhere, and I have yours somewhere too. Okay, so I
Was
don't
that
really have
my Odum symbol tie?
sorry.
My Odum symbol tie.
Okay.
The blue tie with Odum symbols
Yeah,
on it.
we have special ties.
Yeah.
Special. Strange people like us also have strange ties. So it's okay. You see, you gave an excellent presentation, and you may be interested to know that I'm working very much on a similar subjects of my new book, which will be titled "The End of Population Growth." And that's very much on the question of agriculture.
My guess,
Food.
it'll happen either voluntarily or by some means we don't like.
Yeah, I know,
Not the
Charlie. You have to
question of
be.
whether it's going to happen; it's a question of how it's going to happen.
Yeah. You have to be diplomatic now.
Yeah.
Don't say. And anyway, it's happening. The models are saying that the curve is going to start going down. Population curve is going to go down, depending on which model. You have a choice between 2040 and 2080, but my impression it will be reasonably early, so that will be a race, as you said. It might not
Well, Ugo, I'm out of here, so
be what?
I think I'll be gone by then. So.
Nah, it's that never.
And you
You
know,
never know.
I figured this out when I was 22 years old and
Yeah.
decided not to have children. I didn't want to have hostages to fortune. So there we are.
We will see. Anyway, that's what I could say, and see that. And thank you very much, Charlie. It was a very interesting presentation. I loved it, and I don't be pessimistic. We may be here to see the big Seneca Cliff. Now we may not like it, but we may be there.
Okay, we might have enough time to get D. Neil Jones in before we end the presentation, the recorded portion of the presentation. Barry, you have the floor.
Okay, thanks for your presentation, Charles. When you were talking about getting more oil through more technology, I was thinking of a previous presentation about fishing. And yes, we use more fishing nets and smarter boats and found the fish, but eventually we ran out. And it happens rather suddenly. So I'm thinking the same thing is going to be true for oil. I guess I'm looking for hope through a combination of solutions and maybe just get your comment on it. And they mostly have to do with agriculture. So one thing is increased dietary efficiency. I think we will not be able to change the impact of agriculture on the climate until the human population has a plant-rich diet, which medical people have been advising for decades. I don't think we're going to get to where we can, without drastically reducing our livestock. And the previous presentation, I think, has shown that our livestock comprise about 2/3 of the mammalian weight on Earth. So that is just not sustainable. You didn't have much hope for renewable energy, at least it doesn't seem to figure prominently in what's available now, but I'm sure we can produce much, much, much more renewable energy and electrify things. Thinking about agriculture, which I'm also involved in, the machines are not very efficient, especially when it comes to regenerative agriculture. And I'm thinking that there's hope with respect to electrifying those machines, making them robotic and small. And speaking of regenerative agriculture, which must be the form of agriculture I think that we adopt, that will result in massive carbon sequestration. There's an argument about whether it will be enough or not. Nitrogen fixation, recycling in the soil microbiome, and much reduced land area required to feed the world's population if we feed people, not animals. And finally, I guess a cultural decline in population through education and of especially women and working women. That kind of decline has happened in first world societies. I'm not saying we can do that, but is there not hope there? Anyway, that was a long list of what I think solutions that need to happen simultaneously and which are closely related.
I can't argue with any of them. I mean, the question is, are we going to do them? The main thing that's happening with respect to, well, two comments on waste, which I think are very important, is that I'm horrified at how much I throw out, or I should say my wife throws out. And she accuses me of eating anything I find in the refrigerator, but I hate to throw food out. And, you know, my sister and I were talking about this. Our parents grew up in the Depression, and we didn't throw things out. And I'm not attentive enough to eating leftovers soon. And so that's a bad habit on my part. Now, with respect to meat, the big thing that's happening in meat is the Asians are eating more and more meat as they get more wealthy.
Yes.
So it's not going, I guess Westerners are eating a bit less meat for their health reason. I'm diabetic, so I find protein is an easy way not to get too much carbs. But most, and now a third of Americans are diabetic. I mean, I don't know. I think when people talk that way, I want to say, well, you want to reduce your impact on food is don't have children. But that's not a very popular perspective, but I had no children, and I figured this out 60, 70 years ago. 60 years ago. I don't know where we go with this, but if you put them all together, according to the Vaclav Smil, I mean, that guy, he really knows what's going on. And other people that Elizabeth Colbert referenced in the New Yorker article, that do we need a new green revolution? I mean, you know, he talks about the difficulty of doing all of these things, enormous difficulty or impossibility. So yes, I think those ideas are good. Will you please run for prime minister?
At my age, probably not, but
Well, get somebody to do that.
yeah.
So on that wonderful note, this is the end of our presentation. Dave, now we'll have the floor to give our official thanks to Charlie.
Thank you, Claude. Well, Charlie, as usual, this is certainly not your first time here, and it's been one of your better ones, I would say. You've taken us through an awful lot of things which we probably otherwise would not have confronted. I really worry that one of the possibilities about, for example, a new green revolution is Jevons paradox, because I don't think that we've learned what Malthus wanted us to learn, which is that if we're going to increase our food supply, we need self-control, or we're still going to be subject to famine, war, disease, you name it.
Pestilence,
exactly. So, yeah, I don't hold out the kind of hope that somebody else mentioned we perhaps need with respect to the green revolution. I don't think that's going to solve our problems, just as I don't think growth has solved our problems. I think actually there are strong correlations, statistical correlations between growth and every single problem that we have. Anyway, with
and
that,
Bill Reese talks about that very well.
Indeed, indeed. So with that, thank you very much for the talk today. And I invite everybody who is listening or seeing this on YouTube, come to our website. We've got hundreds and hundreds of videos, thousands of articles that talk about a wide variety of materials. Invite you to join us. You can become an associate member now rather than a full member if you wish to, but we'd love to get more people involved. I certainly think that more people, if not everybody, needs to hear the kinds of messages that you'll hear on our channels. So thank you very much.